Former U.S. President Donald Trump has been found guilty in his hush money trial and has been convicted of 34 felony counts. However, it is still unknown if he will go to prison. The charge of falsifying business records is a Class E felony in New York, the lowest tier of felony charges in the state. It is punishable by up to 4 years in prison, though the punishment would ultimately be up to the judge, with no guarantee that he would give Mr. Trump time behind bars. The judge has set Mr. Trump's sentencing for July 11th, days before Republicans are set to formally nominate him as their presidential candidate. Joining us now to unpack the conviction is Andrew Donaldson, editor at ordinarytimes.com. Andrew, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be with you.
Can you walk us through how likely it is that Mr. Trump is actually sent to prison over this, and how important is the July 11th sentencing date, given that Trump is in campaign mode?
Well, we don't know until we get to the sentencing date. In fact, the prosecutors actually in their press conference said they wouldn't even address that until they addressed it in court documents. Most legal experts seem to think he will not get jail time for this. He would be a first-time offender. This is usually, remember, these are misdemeanors that got upgraded to felonies as the underlying charge. That's something that's going to be dealt with in appeal. I would be surprised if you get jail time. Now, normally you would have things like conduct during the trial added into that. We know he violated the gag order. We've seen the way he's gone after the judge and things. I'd be very surprised if he gets jail time. However, if he doesn't get jail time, he will get probation. And for somebody that's campaigning and has other legal things going on, that probation could be very problematic. And the timing is important. You just pointed out the sentencing will be just days before the nominating convention for the Republican Party. Usually that's a big send-up party. You want to get a bounce out of that, and you're going to have this sentencing just days before it. Even if it's stayed for the appeals, it's still going to be out there.
After the conviction, Mr. Trump complained about the location of the trial, arguing that the jury couldn't be impartial. What exactly is his argument, and what do you make of it?
So he's done this a lot. He's giving political statements outside of the courthouse in lieu of talking about the legalities. So yes, it's true. Politically, Manhattan, especially in New York City broadly, is very, very Democratic, about 75 to 15%, give or take, depending on how you want to split it up. But there's also over 500,000 registered Republicans in New York City. That's why you have jury selection. To much fanfare, we had a jury selection process. His attorneys were allowed to weed out. The prosecution's allowed to weed out. And you go through that process, including reportedly at least one jury who said their primary source of news was his own social media, Truth Social. So it's a political statement, but the legal reality doesn't match that statement. But it makes for a good PR thing, even if it doesn't make a good legal strategy.
Now that Mr. Trump is a convicted felon, there are a bunch of questions about what he can and cannot do. In many states, felons cannot vote. Will Mr. Trump be able to vote for himself in the presidential election?
Well, it depends. He's registered now in Florida. He made quite a big deal about moving to Florida and changing his registration during his term in office, even though he'd been a lifelong New Yorker for 70 years before that. Now, Florida was actually one of the states that's already been kind of in the news over the last few years on felon rights, restorative justice, how much rights does a convicted felon have, including voting rights. But again, this is something that's going to play out in the appeals process. I doubt the appeals process is done by November. There's some legalities involved in that. So yes, he's a convicted felon, but the sentencing part of that may be stayed well past whenever the election date is. So you'd have to get a real technical ruling on that. But it's something to consider going down the road. And again, he's got other convictions that may be looming out there. And if he gets probation for this, even if he doesn't get jail time, that could all affect something like his voting rights going down the road.
And what about travel? Does this limit his ability to travel abroad?
It could. Abroad might be one of those things. He's not president right now, so he's probably not going to be going overseas, you would at least think. But probation, he would have a probation officer just like anybody else. But let's be honest here. He's already getting a lot. Look, he took a multi-car motorcade back to his, high-rise penthouse in the high-rise building he owned. He already has quite a bit of slack from the court here in a lot of ways. I doubt they're going to be they're not going to want to fool with it. I don't think they would restrict his travel. Technically a possibility, but in reality, unless he gets actual jail time, I think they're going to be pretty lenient on him campaigning.
And Mr. Trump has also made a series of accusations about the judge in this trial and claimed that the case is nothing more than a Democratic attempt to hurt him in the election. What do you make of that claim?
Yeah, here we go again with a political argument on a legal process. He has an appeal here, and he's going to have a good case for the appeal because the underlying part, we already discussed it. Hush money's not illegal. Even forgery in the business records in and of itself isn't technically illegal except in certain cases. The thing this jury ruled on was that there was a forgery in the business records to cover up an underlying crime. That underlying crime is something that a lot of legal experts have thrown doubt on, but this is what the appeals process is for. It's going to look at that specific thing. It's going to look at the conduct of the judge. All his complaints with the judge will come out in the appeal process. Now, the PR and the politics is good to rail against the judge and that sort of thing, but this is what the appeals process is going to do. And he does have some legal arguments. People across the spectrum say the underlying charges here are going to have to be litigated out in court. So this probably is a little bit far from over yet.
Andrew, thank you so much.